Good morning, friends. It's been a long time, but the call of NFL free agency has brought us back from our slumber. It is the Maslin Football League podcast. I am Ryan. This is Dan, if you're one of the 12 people not in our league. Everybody else knows who we are. But if you are one of the people who are not in our league and you're checking out our show, first and foremost, this is a show we started this season, or I guess last season, to talk about our home fantasy league, which is entering its 17th year of existence. If you have questions about your league, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll be more than happy to answer those questions for you. Otherwise, we are going to spend this show talking about a lot of players which could affect your league anyway, but we are going to talk to them through the lens of the Maslin Football League and who should be kept and who shouldn't be kept. Just to give you a quick rundown, it is a PPR fantasy league where we keep 3 guys from the previous year's roster. So that is why we are doing this show to begin with. But I've talked enough at this point. Daniel Metzger, how are you doing, buddy?
Doing awesome, man. It's my favorite time of the football season. I love the offseason. Draft,
And
free agency, that potential of hope for players to get on new teams and do some big things. You know, a wise man once said, hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things.
who said that?
Andy Dufresne, come on, man.
Oh my God, get out of here with Shawshank Redemption. First and foremost, good morning, though it's not morning where he is, to our one and only fan, Drifter Thrifter, a man who watches this show more than the 12 guys who are in the league. You know, Drifter, we have kept this league local for as long as it has existed, but I will guarantee you, you keep this loyal fan shit up. If we have an opening that we can't fill with someone from Maslin, Ohio, you will be in this league. Thank you for joining us, buddy. It's going to be a fun show.
I'm actually at the point of he outranks anybody else. See, the next opening goes to Drifter, man.
I love it when you have fans like that. So if you haven't picked up from the title of the show, this is going to be our off-season free agency show, and it kicked off with a bang yesterday, Dan. Let's start with the only actual free agent move, which is Robert Woods signing with the Houston Texans. Woods was absolute shit last year. I don't think this moves the needle one way or the other. Could he have a bounce back year in the NFL and possibly in fantasy on a team that should throw the ball a ton? They threw it almost 600 times last year. Yes, but I don't think he's going to be in any keeper discussion. He may not even be on our roster right now when I was going through and looking at players. So
I agree that it doesn't move the needle right now, but I think that there's potential with Houston having 2 picks in the top 10. If they come out of that draft with CJ Stroud at quarterback and another receiver, maybe Jackson Smith and Jigba, combine that with Robert Woods, that could be with Pierce at running back. There's potential for that offense.
So, yeah, I think he could have – I don't think we're ever going to get 2020 Robert Woods again, but he could be better than 2022. That is for certain. However, the other move could affect our keeper market. It depends on if anybody out there wants to make a trade. DJ Moore traded to the Chicago Bears. And, Dan, I have thoughts about this. I have made my thoughts pretty plain on Twitter. I will share my thoughts in a minute, but I'm going to let you get us started here. So, for fantasy purposes, all we really need to focus on here is DJ Moore and possibly Justin Fields. I would say in Carolina, this almost makes whichever quarterback Carolina drafts with that first pick almost undraftable unless they make a big free agent splash. Would you say so in fantasy?
Oh, I agree. I think it's a huge move for DJ Moore to get out of Carolina. I mean, that offense has really struggled. They've never been able to put a good quarterback out there with him. I'm excited for him. I think him and Fields in that offense. I know that offense runs the ball a lot in the past, so I think maybe there's potential for them to open it up. They still have a lot of money to spend in free agency, hopefully. And if they can get some offensive linemen to combine him with Mooney and see what they do at running back. But I think there's some potential there.
So this is where we're going to disagree this early in the show. So when you say potential, DJ Moore was and I'm just using regular PPR scoring, was the wide receiver 24 last year, played 17 games, 118 targets. Are you saying DJ Moore is better than that? Because I will disagree wholeheartedly with you on that.
Yeah, I say his numbers go up next year.
So my issue is, and you've already said my issue, the passing volume. Chicago threw the ball 377 times last year, 80 fewer times than the Carolina Panthers. Even if we see a bump up to what the Carolina Panthers did, DJ Moore also scored 7 touchdowns last year, which he has never done before. I don't trust that he is not going to be the exact same DJ Moore that we saw in Carolina moving forward. Is this a great move for Chicago? Absolutely. Is this an amazing move for Justin Fields, who honestly I didn't even add to the show sheet, but we need to I'm now going to make a mental note that we need to talk about that for Taylor here in a few seconds, because Taylor is just fucking stacked at keepers.
It's on your sheet.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Justin Fields?
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
Did you put it on there? Because I didn't.
No, it's on there. It's in like a little quote on the side next to the running back situation for them, I thought.
Okay. I forgot about it when I was doing my show prep this morning. But Justin Fields, I think this is an amazing move for. Was already a top 5 fantasy quarterback last year. His rushing upside gives him one of the best floors in football, and now he has a legit wide receiver 1. I hate this for DJ Moore. All that being said, if you think I'm wrong, and I think most of the people in this league think I'm wrong all the time, please make me an offer for DJ Moore. Best DJ Moore in town is available for trade right now. Please come take him from me. And there are teams out there that need keepers, and that's going to be a big focus of this show. I kind of went through and took a look at that. Before we dive into the free agency, first and foremost, Drifter, congratulations. League champion is awesome. Hopefully you weren't too affected by the insanity that was the end of the season with the Buffalo Bills and Cincinnati Bengals. But congratulations on that. And yeah, if you're relying on Justin Fields throwing to increase the value of a wide receiver, I agree wholeheartedly. And that is my biggest issue with them. So DJ Moore got the ball rolling. Dan, I wanted to start with 2 guys who are not changing teams. I originally had them on this sheet before franchise tags dropped. Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs. And I actually went back and watched our last episode of the season because we had already started talking about free agency when that started. And kudos to you. You said they'd both be back with their teams. They're both back with their teams. Dan, my issue is the volume's going to be there. They were already willing to run these guys into the ground last year in the last year of their deal. And now they're in the last year of their deal again. Are you concerned with 2 aging running backs? You have to call it what it is in the NFL. 2 aging running backs who have now less incentive to give their all for their team playing on this franchise tag?
No, I'm not concerned at all. From the aspect of them giving their all, I think those 2 guys will give it their all, because their only chance at another contract at all in the NFL is if they're giving it their all. And that's what they're going to be looking at. Will they, in the back of their mind, maybe have some worry that they don't have a secure contract? They didn't have a secure contract last year either. Going into this year, from a fantasy perspective in a keeper league, am I concerned if I have them on my team? If I'm a team that's going for the championship this year, like I think I have good keepers, I have good draft picks, not concerned at all, because you're going in for that championship. If you're a team that is looking like they're rebuilding and you're not going to be someone contending for the playoffs potentially, you don't have a lot of good draft picks, then yeah, I'm concerned, because they're not someone you can build around going forward, and they should probably be moved for future considerations.
Well, let's not talk in hypotheticals here. Stevie has Saquon Barkley. Stevie has questionable keepers outside of Saquon Barkley, who was a top 5 running back last year, and I love Amon-Ra St. Brown. So you have Rachaad White, who we're going to talk about a little bit later in the show. You have DeAndre Hopkins, who we're going to talk about a little bit later in the show. You have Mark Andrews, Michael Pittman. These are all guys with questions, plain and simple. And Stevie does not pick until the 3rd round of our draft. However, he also has Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray is going to have a rough 2023. No different way to cut it. He's not going to play 17 games, plain and simple. He's not even going to be there for the start of the season. How are you handling a team like Stevie's team right now? Should he be shopping the hell out of Saquon Barkley then?
Oh, I absolutely think Steve should be trading him and quickly. Because Saquon's not somebody you can count on in the future. I don't think, like you said, Steve's keepers are a mess. And with those lack of draft picks, I mean, it's something I think Steve went all in on last year, and it just didn't work out for him. I don't think he realized he was going all in. When you look at, like you said, I mean, I don't trust anybody on the Cardinals. And I know you mentioned the running back from Tampa Bay. As someone who actively wants people to come trade, for Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, I wouldn't keep anybody on Tampa Bay's team on my team. Like, I don't trust that offense. They looked terrible last year with Brady. I can't imagine they look any better with Trask as their quarterback next year.
Well, I'm going to pose you the same. Go ahead.
They just cut their one of their offensive linemen. Their defense, they're letting David go. I mean, and
they're probably going to have to make more moves on defense. They're still not young on defense. So.
And well, not only that, they're also, I think they're up against the cap, I'm pretty sure. And I just don't see how they can make any real key additions to their team, and they're not picking in the top 15. You know what I mean? It's just I think that team's gonna be a mess next year.
Yeah, I agree with everything you're saying there. But I want to talk about Jacobs because Greg is in a quasi similar situation to Stevie, not picking until the second round, if I remember correctly. But you brought up your team, and your team, when I was going through and looking at keepers, it's there's a lot of questions because you had such a Tampa Bay focused team last year. I love T. Higgins. I think he's going well. You know what? I don't want to say I love T. Higgins. That was me being far too generous. I've been down on T. Higgins, but as a keeper for your team, I think he's probably a pretty good keeper. And then I have to try to find my notes real quick. I had one other guy for you.
I have Dameon Pierce. I think.
Yeah, Dameon Pierce. Absolutely. Are you a buyer? Are you someone who is considering Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs right now? If the price is right?
No, because those two guys are going to want a lot for them, and they should. I'm just not willing to pay that price. I traded you, Mixon, and AJ Brown last year so I could have 3 first-round picks this year.
Yeah, and now I have potentially convicted attempted murderer Joe Mixon on my team, and
I'm not sure if you
AJ Brown's not even on my team anymore. So.
I'm not sure if you saw or not, but Joe Mixon's thing, they came out and said he's not a suspect.
Which is fair. But how many times are you going to be not a suspect in the NFL in 1 month and still have a job? Is the better question.
You 3 months ago when I traded you Joe Mixon that I don't think Joe Mixon's going to be on the Bengals next year.
Yep.
I stand by that. Before all this happened, I don't think he was making the Bengals 23 roster. Where was I going? Looking back at my team.
They're going to want too much, yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, looking back at my team, I am very happy to keep George Kittle. I am very happy to keep Deshaun Watson if the Browns add another receiver and that offense looks like it's going to go in the right direction. I'm very comfortable keeping either one of those as a third keeper and having.
Yeah, I missed Watson when I was going through your team, so that makes sense. And Kittle was the guy I had for you as your third.
The way Kittle played at the end of the season last year, absolutely a keeper.
So are you concerned? So Brock Purdy had his surgery this week. We should get more news on him being ready. I guess if it's Trey Lance starting the season for the San Francisco 49ers, does that cause concern for you with George Kittle?
No, I think Kittle was hurt at the start of last year. Why he started off slow? I believe in Trey Lance. I think Trey Lance is going to be a good quarterback if he can stay healthy. And if he can't stay healthy, I trust Brock Purdy to come in and play well like he did last year.
There you go. Kittle wants Purdy. He made that pretty obvious, but he may have to change his tune if Purdy's not ready for the beginning of the season. So I want to just quickly circle back to Josh Jacobs. So I think you would agree then Greg should likely be looking to move Josh Jacobs as well. Because
I think Greg's in a little bit better spot than Steve is from a roster standpoint.
Okay.
I mean, he has Debo, right?
So he has Debo. You have an injured Pollard, and that was going to come up later in the show. So let's save Greg for now. Let's move on to our first hypothetical. Okay. So we've talked about Stevie having some potential issues at keepers right now. Is there a spot where DeAndre Hopkins, who is likely to be traded, not a free agent, is there a spot where DeAndre Hopkins can end up that would make him a keeper in your mind for Stevie's team, or is he still just a trade candidate? Hopkins, if you don't remember, was actually very good last year. Coming in, he averaged over 16 fantasy points per game over the 9 games. If you think that, Kyler Murray's not going to be 100%, they're going to be running a new offense, a trade could be a good thing for DeAndre Hopkins. So my question to you is, there's some ideal landing spot out there for you where you're like, Stevie should keep DeAndre Hopkins?
I don't know if there's an ideal spot because you just never know what team he's going to end up on. I know that living here in Ohio, I listen to Cleveland Sports Talk, and all the sports talk people are talking about how the Browns are going to trade for Hopkins. The Browns are going to get Hopkins. That'd be an interesting fit if he was in Cleveland. It really as long as he's not in Arizona, I think Hopkins has potential.
So everyone likes to point the needle to New England, but I don't think people remember that a lot of the static in Houston was between Bill O'Brien and DeAndre Hopkins, and Bill O'Brien was borderline racist to DeAndre Hopkins. I just don't see that as a fit or a work whatsoever. So.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I don't see that happening. I've heard some stuff, maybe him going to the Giants.
And they were a team I was going to bring up. You now have the $40 million man, Daniel Jones there. You have Saquon Barkley there, but you have no wide receivers. They literally only have Isaiah Hodgins and a Wan'Dale Robinson as their 2 paid wide receivers right now.
Yeah, so I think that could be a good thing for Saquon as well, for them to have a good, solid receiver on the outside like Hopkins. But that puts Stevie in a bind as well, because then you have the 2 guys on the same team.
Yeah, and the Giants aren't a team that you're clamoring to keep a bunch of players for. So let's get to our first free agent of our free agent show. A name that has to be mentioned, even though you would never think of him as a keeper, even in a 14-team league like our league. Jamal Williams set the world on fire last year with 17 rushing touchdowns. He was a top 10 fantasy running back. Terry's team is in very, very good shape. He is a team that has Austin Eckler, Jalen Waddle, Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry could be on the move, though Tennessee refuted that. I don't think Jamal Williams is ever going to have a spot on Terry's team, barring an injury to one of those guys. Is Jamal Williams someone teams who need keepers should be looking to acquire on the cheap? Though we all know there's no such thing as on the cheap with Terry.
Poor Terry. Me personally, I don't trust it. I could see why someone would, depending on the situation he gets into, because I don't think he's ever going to be a potential RB1 for any team. So to me, no, but I know people get desperate. It is a possibility.
I think it's best for him back in Detroit, which then hurts Taylor's DeAndre Swift. But I think it's best for him back in Detroit. And I kind of did the math that if he scored 17 touchdowns last year, if you knock that down to 10, which is still a high number in the NFL, but a much more reachable number, he's still a top 25 running back. Top 25 running back in our league is a borderline keeper, and they tend to need to be younger if you're going to keep a guy who's a top 25 running back. And Jamal Williams, I believe, turns 28, 29, even 30 this year, something along that. I didn't look that up. So I agree with you there. I don't think there's much keeper potential there. I basically only earmarked. So there are 4 teams that are not really affected by any free agency. And that is Phil, Horvath, Xavier, and you. I marked you as a potential need of keepers. Horvath, in my opinion, only has 2 keepers, Najee Harris and CeeDee Lamb. I know he is flirting with Jameson Williams. I don't know about that. Phil, again, has some questionable guys. Amari Cooper, I don't know if you want that as your 3rd keeper. Xavier has questions, but I think he has his keepers on his team. So I really think Phil, Horvath, and potentially you are going to be our big buyers of a cheap 3rd keeper. And I don't think Jamal Williams is going to move the needle for any of the 3 of you. So.
No. Speaking of Phil, can we sidebar onto that? What are your thoughts on his trade of Hurts and Walker?
I think it's an amazing trade for Darren, who I think may have my favorite keepers in the league right now. Like I said, I'm really impressed with what Darren did. I don't love it for Phil. I don't know why he was in such a hurry to move Kenneth Walker. I am very, very loudly in love with Kenneth Walker. But when you look at Darren's team, Darren has the 107. He has a pick in every round of the first, 9 rounds of the draft. His draft ends in round 9. And he has great keepers. He obviously paid up for Javonte Williams last year, and all the news about Javonte Williams is very concerning. But he was able to replace it. And I'm a big believer in Chris Olave. He's going to come up later in the show. I love it for Darren. Don't love it for Phil. I question Phil's decisions all the time, and he was 2nd place in the league last year. Congrats to Taylor. So I don't love it. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
I felt like he could have got more, and I told him this. I think he could have got more if he traded those 2 guys separately.
Yeah, he took the offer that came to him. I don't know. I'm not a big fan. Love it for Darren. I was going to bring that up.
Yeah, Darren made a great trade. I agree with you.
We've kind of already went a little long. I don't think Jacoby Myers needs much talk, so I'm just going to ask you a very simple question: is there a landing spot that makes Jacoby Myers a keeper in fantasy football?
No.
So we don't need to talk much more about Jacoby Myers, but let's move on to someone who I think is a very interesting quote unquote free agent. He did get franchise tagged. Brian absolutely hates his Lamar Jackson. Brian paid big bucks to require Lamar Jackson last year when he wanted Josh Allen and Rob wouldn't move off of Josh Allen. Lamar Jackson, as of now, is a Baltimore Raven for $33.1 million or some insane number like that. He clearly doesn't want to be on the franchise tag. Baltimore doesn't want to pay him. There are teams flirting with the idea of acquiring him. Landing spot aside, is Brian being just insane? Because I don't see a 3rd keeper on his team outside of keeper George Pickens, who he has jokingly been in love with this entire time. Brian has to keep Lamar Jackson, right? Sorry about hitting.
He literally paid a fortune to get him. It is insane to me that he liked him enough to pay that, but I think it was more out of anger than it was anything else over not
Yeah, it
getting
was
that
like a
from
fuck
him.
you to Rob.
Yeah. Yeah. But knowing Brian, when Brian has someone he loves, Pickens, he's going to keep him.
And if he has someone he hates, he's not going to. So Brian would
He's
need someone to acquire Lamar Jackson, I feel like. So.
Yeah, he needs someone to make a trade, but I don't think he's going to get much for him, especially at this point. Just because of how the question mark of where he's going to be, the question mark of Lamar Jackson has been hurt the end of the last 2 years. It's hard to really give up a lot for someone who has shown the past 2 years they're not going to be there when you need them the most in the playoffs and a potential championship. But when Lamar Jackson does end up on another team, which is what I think will happen, I think it's going to maybe put his value up high. Yeah, I think the market will go up at that point. My guess, I think he ends up a Raider.
And then you got him with Devontae Adams. I think that's enough to move Brian's needle back to loving him, and I don't think we worry about the trade at that point. Brian loves Devontae Adams.
He does love Devontae Adams, but he also traded him away last year too. So
he did. I mean, let's be clear. Everybody on Brian's team is tradable. There's no question about that, except for maybe George Pickens. Everybody on Brian's team is ready to be moved.
When I was doing prep for this, I went back to look at that Lamar Jackson trade. Like, how great of a spot would Brian be in right now if he had those two receivers of his and those draft picks he had traded away to get Lamar Jackson? He would be in a great spot right now.
I don't disagree, but I actually think getting a quarterback, and Lamar Jackson is a proven fantasy changer at quarterback, regardless of what you think of him as an NFL quarterback. I just think Brian needs to keep Lamar Jackson. Those two wide receivers and Lamar Jackson are a great starting point for Brian. The issue is, I mean, he still has he still has a high draft pick, right?
No, he traded that to you. He doesn't pick until like the 5th round, I believe.
Oh, that's right. He is out in the 5th round. So yeah, it's a rough situation, but if he attacks running back like he didn't do last year, I don't hate it. I personally wouldn't consider keeping it. Lamar Jackson was the QB 14 in just 12 games played last year. We are a 14-team league. He was a startable asset missing 1/3 of the season. I'm good with Lamar Jackson. Like I said, we're running longer than I thought we were, and there's no time limit on the show, but I don't know that we need to talk about Juju Smith-Schuster. Same question with Jacoby Myers. Is there somewhere he can land? We talked about Greg, the Tony Pollard injury is the biggest concern for Greg, but I don't even think Juju slips into the possibilities for Greg, even if Tony Pollard isn't able to play.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I wouldn't even consider Juju. I mean, you don't even know where he's a free agent, correct?
He is.
Yeah, you don't even know where he's going to be playing next year.
Yeah, I guess my question is, I liked him in Kansas City. I still don't think he's a keeper. I like Juju in Kansas City, and I would like to see him go back there. Let's talk about someone who could sneak into Greg's possible keepers here if Tony Pollard's unable to play. Aaron Rodgers could be a New York Jet. I think Greg has picked up on the fact that you need a quarterback in this league. He played the Aaron Rodgers, Dak Prescott game. From talking offline, I know you and I don't particularly love Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers with the New York Jets, with Garrett Wilson, with Elijah Moore, with Breece Hall. Is Aaron Rodgers, I guess, is he a fantasy starter in our league? I don't think either one of us is going to call him a keeper, but is he even a starter if you move him into that New York Jets offense in our league?
For me, when it comes down to my draft prep and I look at Aaron Rodgers, before the draft starts, the first thing I do is I cross his name off. I am under no circumstances drafting Aaron Rodgers in any of my fantasy leagues. I think he is cooked. I think his career, while it's been a great one, and he'll be relevant from an NFL standpoint, but from a fantasy purposes, I am not putting Aaron Rodgers anywhere near my team.
And another guy who I know you don't like, and we're just going to probably start or keep with Greg's team here and then probably move on from Greg's team. Is there a spot where Kareem Hunt could land that would make him a backup keeper? Because we've seen greatness from Kareem Hunt, but then he was just kind of like relegated to nothingness in Cleveland last year.
He's getting older. I think he'll end up on a team where he'll get maybe some opportunities off some games that are going to be relevant. I just don't think he'll have a relevant season again.
Yeah. I put on my notes that if he ended up in Chicago or Philly, he could be very, very interesting. The big rumors are that he's looking at Denver, and it's a sign that Denver is very worried about the return of Javonte Williams. I read a beat reporter for Denver who said Javonte Williams will never be the same again after this injury. So, it sucks for Darren, but again, he probably fixed his keeper situation. It sucks for me because I fucking love Javonte Williams. But it's not looking great for Javonte Williams, but I don't think going to Denver, I mean, I was about to say I don't think that moves the needle, but a pass catching running back in a Sean Payton system could be super interesting.
Yeah, it really depends on where he ends up. Didn't Javonte Williams have the same injury that J.K. Dobbins came back from last year?
I don't know if it's the same. I just know he tore, from what I understand, everything in the knee up.
And that's what I think Dobbins did as well.
Okay.
And that's why Dobbins wasn't ready at the start of the year this year.
Yeah, so I mean, it's going to probably end up being a wasted year for Dobbins, for Javonte Williams, like it was for Dobbins. But then I like Dobbins coming into this year. Great question from Drifter. Do we think Clyde Edwards-Helaire gets a new start? I have been saying for the beginning of the year that I think Kareem Hunt ends up back in Kansas City, that he did his time in Cleveland. He did his time in prison, and now he comes back to Andy Reid. That's where I think Kareem Hunt ends up. But the Denver situation is interesting.
So
hold on, Mike. Let me add on to what he's asking here. Do you think he gets a new starter? Do you think he's in Kansas City? And as a first round running back, is there something that makes him interesting as a keeper? I don't even know what team he's on. He may not even be on the team early.
So. For Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I've actually just running back carousel. I've heard some others, like read somewhere that Hunt to Kansas City is a possibility.
It's on your team.
And for Clyde Edwards-Helaire, if he gets cut from the Chiefs, which I think is a possibility, I wouldn't be surprised to see him in Cincinnati. Him and Joe Burrow are pretty close. And if the Bengals get rid of Mixon and bring in Edwards-Helaire.
Okay, so let's take that line, Dan, because that's a fucking awesome line. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is the primary running back in Cincinnati. Joe Mixon's gone. I think if Joe Mixon's gone, they re-sign Samaje Perine, but let's not even bring him into the fold right now. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is cut, signs immediately with Cincinnati. They want him. He signs there. You, who have questionable keepers and one of your guys gets hurt, would you consider Clyde Edwards-Helaire in a league where 14 teams keep 3 players?
If he is in Cincinnati, since I did not draft any other running back, then yes, I would consider keeping him.
Okay.
But if the Bengals if he's there and the Bengals also spent like 3rd or 4th on a rookie running back, then no, I'm not keeping him.
Because Joe Mixon saw, correct me if I'm wrong, and I know you'll know, Joe Mixon saw the highest passing volume of his entire career last year.
He did, and I think it could actually be higher if they could leave Joe Mixon in on passing downs, but he's just an inconsistent pass blocker. And I don't know enough about Edwards-Helaire to tell you how consistent he is.
Well,
but I know
that's what kept him back in Kansas City, and part of it is he can't put weight on. He mentioned he had like spleen surgery his first year in the league and was playing football as an NFL starting running back at like 165 fucking pounds or something like that.
Yeah, no, he it depends on where he's at with that. If he can find a way to be an adequate pass blocker, that they can leave him on the field with Burrow and passing downs, and absolutely, especially then, I think he could be a monster. But it's just that question.
Yeah. Last one I think we need to bring up. I have David Montgomery on the list. I'm not keeping him. Again, he kind of falls into the same exact spot as Jacoby Myers, Juju Smith-Schuster. They're boring. I wrote in my notes, he's the definition of meh. He was the RB24 last year in what could be defined as an ideal situation. But let's talk. We talked about Joe Mixon. You mentioned, Joe Mixon could see better passing game work. Let's say Joe Mixon is completely exonerated and the Bengals and he kiss and make up. I'm not keeping him. I am disgusted with Joe Mixon at this point. Is Joe Mixon worth another team taking a look for, especially if there's more passing game work out there for him?
So it kind of goes back to what we said about Stevie and Saquon. If you're a team that you have good draft picks and you need a keeper, you need a player, and you think this is going to be a big year for you, yeah, go, because he's someone you can have and he could have a good year if he's still in Cincinnati. But if he's someone you think you're going to need to be counting on for the next couple of years and you're just trying to build something, no, he's not worth it. He's not going to be in the NFL a couple of years from now. He's getting older.
It sounds like he could be a fit for a team like Steve Horvath. Horvath has the first pick of the draft in a year where Bijan Robinson is apparently a god. But then he has 3 other first-round picks and the first pick of the second round. He has 2 good keepers. So Horvath, Joe Mixon is your guy. Let's talk a little bit.
Let's not to steal your thing there, but if I'm looking at Horvath, who has so much draft capital, that he could easily.
You're not even worried about a third keeper, right?
Well, no, I would be worried. I think he has an opportunity. He has so much draft capital. He can actually find someone better than Joe Mixon.
And that's perfect. So he's a team where we talked about earlier, Josh Jacobs and Saquon Barkley.
He should be trying to get Saquon Barkley to throw on there. He could get Saquon for one of those ones, I'm sure. Well, hopefully if Steve is smart, and try and start build that way. I mean,
and Horvath is a team that desperately needs to find success in this league. It has been a rough run of seasons for Horvath. At one point, I forget what the losing streak got to last year, but it was something like 17 fucking games before he broke that losing streak.
So. I'll go back to this. I understand he had a bad year, but Steve built a good team last year. It just didn't work out. Like he just kept getting hurt. Yeah.
All right. We were at a half an hour, but we're going to keep going. So sorry to those who didn't want to spend that amount of time with us. Whenever players leave teams, there's going to cause another change in value, Dan. So I'm going to just kind of list some of these players, and I just want you to tell me if these changes make them keepers. So I'm going to start with Rachaad White, and I think you've kind of already answered that your answer is no here. So Leonard Fournette has been released, but so has one of their best offensive linemen. There's no Tom Brady on the team, and it's likely some of these wide receivers move. So is Rachaad White a keeper?
Okay, so I'll say this. Well, again, if you're trying to win this year, no, he's not. If he's someone that you truly believe in a couple of years is going to be worth something and you want to hold on to because you're trying to build for something, tank for a year or two, then yeah, go ahead and keep him. If that's Steve's going to try and start all over again. But if Steve thinks he's going to be winning a championship in the next 2 years, no, he's not. He's not somebody you should be trying to build around. Because again, I don't trust that team. I don't trust that offense. I don't trust their direction.
I'm going to give you a player in almost the exact same situation, except you do probably trust their team. James Cook. James Cook is on JR's team. JR is pretty good at keepers. I'm trying to find my notes here. So JR has Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, and then probably Garrett Wilson is somebody I love. But it is James Cook, if he's the primary in Buffalo, was kind of looked at more as a pass catcher. He's likely not a 3-down back, but is James Cook with no Devin Singletary someone JR should consider?
It depends on what happens in the draft. If Buffalo does not go out and draft a running back, absolutely, I would. I think he looked really good at the end of the year as he was getting more carries. Because I have Singletary on my team, and he was starting out carry Singletary during the season. Okay. So yeah, if they're not going out and getting somebody else, and it's just going to be Cook, and who's the guy they traded from Himes? If it's going to be Cook and Himes going into next year, absolutely, I would keep Cook.
Hines will almost certainly be released. I saw a statistic. Hines is the number 15 paid running back in the whole NFL right now. He is literally committing robbery to play special teams. So he'll at least have to restructure. Though he did have 2 big punt returns to kind of save the Bills season. Similar situation, just moving over to wide receiver. Treylon Burks and Kenny's team. Kenny obviously went youth. He is pretty well set at running back, but he does have some questions. He has Jonathan Taylor and Breece Hall, but he has some questions as a third keeper, and you're probably looking youth here if he doesn't buy Brian Robinson or Treylon Burks. Should Kenny be a buyer, or would Robinson or Burks, and I'm more focusing on Burks here because of the loss of Robert Woods in free agency and possibly the trading of Derrick Henry. Is Treylon Burks, did he do enough last season that you think, we love young wide receivers in this league, is Treylon Burks someone that could be considered?
No, I wouldn't even consider putting Treylon Burks on my roster for next year. I'm just being serious. Like, they just have 2 of their starting offensive linemen. Like, what direction is Tennessee going? Do you trust Tannehill? I mean,
I hate Tannehill. Always have, always will.
And then they're talking again. They've come out and said those were not true rumors about them shopping Henry, but I am a Tennessee's another team. I'm not putting anybody from that team on my roster unless it's Henry.
Okay. DeAndre Swift, if Jamal Williams leaves, he's not going to be a keeper on Taylor's team, plain and simple. Taylor, like I said, what a great job Taylor did with keepers and everything. And I think his draft is not no, I think I'm wrong. I think he fucked his draft way up at the end of the season.
I think he's not picking until the 3rd or 4th round.
Yeah, so Taylor's first pick is in the 3rd round, and then his second pick is in the 7th round. So Taylor has an interesting draft. However, Taylor is wonderful with keepers. So he has Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp, obviously. Then you have Devonta Smith, DeAndre Swift, and Alvin Kamara. Kamara, obviously, with his own legal issues. But Taylor has issues. Taylor has no issues is what I'm trying to say. I don't think DeAndre Swift is going to make it to his team. But is DeAndre Swift a great trade candidate if Jamal Williams is gone? DeAndre Swift was great through the air last year, and we know targets and PPR running backs are things you should look for in our league especially.
If Williams is gone, Absolutely. I think he's someone to look for. But if Williams is back, it's questionable at that point. It's just hard when you have a running back by committee and the other guy's getting all the goal line work and all the touchdowns.
Let's lump these guys in together. Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave. I think they're both keepers. I'm not worried about who ends up with the Jets, and I'm pretty happy if it's Aaron Rodgers, even though I don't love Aaron Rodgers. Derek Carr, I think, in his deep passing ability, makes Chris Olave just an absolute stud. What are your thoughts on those two wide receivers moving into next year?
Agree. They're both
Wilson's on JR's team. Olave is on Darren's.
I believe they're both worthy of being keepers. Now that Olave has a quarterback, absolutely. Wilson makes me nervous for this upcoming year. If they don't get Rodgers, they don't get another quarterback, they just bring the same QBs back they had last year. I think he'll still have good games and be worthy just for his future potential when the Jets do get a real NFL quarterback.
Okay. You brought this one up, and I liked it a lot. Calvin Ridley comes back to the Jacksonville Jaguars. And you and I have discussed in the past, and it was something that I had fought for many years, and then I clearly bought in when I bought Patrick Mahomes. You are not going to win a championship in this league without an elite quarterback. Does the return of Calvin Ridley and the growth we saw out of Trevor Lawrence last year, number one, does it make Trevor Lawrence an elite quarterback? Is he someone Rob should consider keeping in our league? And number two is, does the addition of Calvin Ridley and the re-signing of Evan Ingram, does that hurt Christian Kirk, where Rob should not consider keeping Christian Kirk, who I believe was a top 10 wide receiver last year?
Christian Kirk is absolutely not capable, in my opinion. If you look over the last 8 games, he was like wide receiver like 34. If you just look at the end of the season, yeah, he came out and had a good start to the season, but now you talk about him going from being the number 1 guy down to the number 2 guy. And again, Ridley makes me nervous. It's hard to take 2 years off in the NFL and come back and be the same guy you were. Ask Deshaun Watson.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because we can't just think of this as a 1-year suspension for Ridley. He was suspended because he was out and gambling. So he was already not playing.
As someone who drafted him the year this all started, or I kept him that year. I traded for him.
You traded for him from Rob.
And kept him because I believed in him. And I feel like I'm coming from, the he's my ex kind of standpoint. I'm bitter with the guy, but I also don't. What happens if they start off 1-3 and he starts getting down again? And is he going to just quit like he did 2 years ago?
Here's the thing.
It's a risk. It is a risk.
I realize how dumb my questions sound now as I'm looking at Rob's keepers. Rob has Josh Allen, so he's keeping Josh Allen. So the question is, should another team consider acquiring Trevor Lawrence? Is he someone who's taking a leap? Because let's throw Horvath out there again. Horvath is in great shape, has 2 good keepers, has the draft picks to make his team amazing. Is, instead of gambling on quarterback in the draft, is Trevor Lawrence a guy he should maybe look to go get so he's already solid at quarterback?
Absolutely. I think Trevor Lawrence is worthy of being kept. If Trevor Lawrence is in the draft and I don't have a quarterback, then Trevor Lawrence, I will be looking at.
Yeah, and you suffered at quarterback last year, so getting the right guy makes all the fucking difference. So.
Yeah. No, I think Trevor Lawrence could be a monster next year. I think he's going to keep, his 3rd year in the league. I think he has potential there. The offense looks like it's getting better and better. If Calvin Ridley does come back to be some sort of form of Calvin Ridley, that offense could be a top 5 offense in the NFL.
I'm ecstatic about this offense. I'm ecstatic about Trevor Lawrence. I have done my first run of projections for next year already, and Trevor Lawrence was my QB5. So I agree with everything you were saying. I have him ahead of Justin Fields. I have him ahead of Justin Herbert, actually. We have a great question in the show that you came up with, but my last question to you when it comes to free agency, and it's more going back to the DJ Moore thing. We didn't give this enough time. Taylor, our champion, wonderful roster, terrible draft. 3 of the best keepers you could really ask for in Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill. Is it time for Taylor to move one of those wide receivers and hitch his wagon to Justin Fields as the elite quarterback who won him a fantasy championship in 2022? We did not start the show with Taylor, as I should have, but let's end the show with Taylor. Is Justin Fields a keeper that should surpass one of those great wide receivers for Taylor?
One of the reasons why I hate that we do this show is for what I'm about to say, because I absolutely want Taylor to keep Cooper Kupp.
When I got into fantasy, Dan used to bust my balls all the time that I tipped my hand too much, and now I am forcing Dan to tip his hand. Go for it, buddy.
I hope Taylor doesn't watch this show. I hope he misses.
Taylor's the only one who's going to watch it, so.
Nah, Rob will watch it too. I want him to keep Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp is a 30-year-old wide receiver
Tied to a
who
38-year-old quarterback.
a team that looks like they're selling. They're not trying to win. There's rumors of Stafford being traded at this point. And Stafford, I guess, has come out and said he's open to being traded. Taylor should absolutely not keep Cooper Kupp and keep Justin Fields. Taylor tried to trade me Cooper Kupp at the end of last season at the trade deadline for, I believe, Joe Mixon. I absolutely told him, no, there's no chance. I want no part of Cooper Kupp.
The interesting thing is going to be is Taylor's going to trade to Cooper Kupp to somebody. And then how much does Taylor pay to get Cooper Kupp back on his team next year? But that's a question for a show later on.
No. He ain't got to pay because that person is going to be mad.
They're going to cut him
way too much, and they're just going to cut him by week 6, and Taylor's going to put him back. And then Cooper Kupp's going to have some kind of monster run at the end of the season and then win Taylor another championship.
All right. So anybody who rode with us for 40 minutes, we appreciate it. Drifter, if I understood your tweet correctly, tomorrow's your birthday. Happy birthday, buddy. I hope you have an absolute
happy birthday to our future league mate.
Yeah, thanks for joining us again this week, man. Hopefully a couple of league mates watch it. And Dan, you had a wonderful idea to end the show with a question that these jackasses need to answer for us. So answer in the comments, answer on the league chat board. But Dan, my question to you, or I guess your question to the league, is what 1 or 2 free agent moves do you think are going to have the biggest effect in fantasy football this year?
I think the DJ Moore trade is going to have a huge impact. I really do. I think Justin Fields and DJ Moore are going to have more value. I think Chicago is going to have a really good offense next year. We'll see if their defense can get them into the playoffs or make them a relevant NFL team. But from a fantasy perspective, I think that's one. And where Lamar Jackson ends up for me is going to be number 2. If he ends up back in Baltimore, then I take that statement back because I don't think he's going to change much. They don't look like they're adding much. I'm not sure if you caught where they're one of their offensive coordinator or one of their coaches or general manager was threw the receivers under the bus.
Yeah, and Rashad Bateman was not happy with that.
Yeah, so that's already off to a good start there. But if Lamar Jackson ends up with the Raiders or some other team that has relevant receivers that he's never played with before, I think those are the 2 moves that could have the most fantasy impact.
I'll throw another one at you, even though they said they're not interested. If Lamar Jackson ends up in Atlanta, Drake London and Kyle Pitts become very, very interesting prospects. I don't know that London becomes a keeper if you believe he is trading from me. But Kyle Pitts on Xavier's team, because Xavier has some interesting keepers. That is not my answer, by the way, but I have another answer. But Xavier, he has Christian McCaffrey. I assume he's keeping Travis Etienne. Then you have Dalvin Cook, who could be cut. DK Metcalf, Terry McLaurin, as a keeper. But Kyle Pitts in a league where you want to have an elite tight end, if Lamar Jackson is there, I think Pitts has to be kept, right?
Oh yeah, if Lamar Jackson is there, kind of going back to Lamar Jackson, one of the things, there's all these rumors about Miami, but they can't do anything for walks. They don't have that first round draft pick. What if they work out a trade Lamar Jackson to Miami for Tua and a 1?
I don't know what the logistics would be considering they just picked up his 5th-year option yesterday.
But if you're trading that contract, you're trading it to Baltimore. Yeah. You know what I mean? Maybe could you imagine Lamar with Tyreek and Waddle?
It'd be fucking amazing, plain and simple. I'm gonna go oddball because I'm an oddball, and there's a player that I loved last year that didn't do all that well, and a position that I always root to see better players in the NFL. If my guy, Dalton Schultz, can go sign with the Los Angeles Chargers and his former offensive coordinator and catch balls from Justin Herbert, I think Dalton Schultz is a top 3, maybe top 2 tight end in fantasy football. And Justin Herbert is going to shoot up my rankings because I love Dalton Schultz and I think he's going to fit into that offense so very well. Gerald Everett had competent weeks, and Gerald Everett is not half the player that Dalton Schultz is. So I think the changing free agent move is going to be Dalton Schultz signing with the Chargers. Terry puts him back into the draft, and some very lucky team adds him and gets the number 2 tight end in fantasy football.
Well, you have the 4th pick, so you could team up Schultz and Kelsey, and then you have.
I played the Gronk Jimmy Graham game before. So
when Kelsey retires next year, you can just go right into the keeping Schultz.
I got the new Travis Kelsey. No, big Dalton Schultz guy. He should not be kept. He certainly shouldn't be kept on Terry's team, which is why he didn't make the free agency list. But I think it's going to be a very, very fun move, and it makes Justin Herbert just so damn interesting. Who even has Justin Herbert?
Terry.
I don't know. Terry. So there you go. And I don't think we mentioned him as a keeper for Terry, did we? Did I?
No.
Who do I have as Terry's keepers? I have Eckler, Waddle, and things interesting. And Terry was very adamant about getting an elite quarterback. So maybe I'm completely wrong about Terry's keepers as well. So guys, we hope you rode with us for 45 minutes. Please jump into the comments. Enjoy the fucking show. Let's have some fun this offseason. So what free agent move do you guys think is going to have the biggest effect on fantasy football? What were we right about? What were we wrong about? What do you want to see on this show? And just to give you a preview, Dan and I had the great idea that we are going to run a series leading up to the season, leading up to the draft, where you guys are going to get to come on and defend your moves, defend your trade, and just basically talk about what your plan is for the offseason. We'd love to have all 12 of you come on 12 consecutive weeks. So get at us. We want you on the show. It's all fun. It's all love. Dan, any parting words for our friends?
As always, love you guys.
I don't have anything bad to say. All I would like to say is that every fringe keeper in the entire universe is on my roster right now, and I will sell cheap. So ignore every bad thing I said about my roster today. Remember every great thing that Dan said about my roster today and how great Joe Mixon is going to be on the Cincinnati Bengals next year. Way better than Saquon Barkley. Way better than Josh Jacobs. Horvath, get at me, baby. I'll take your worst one. We can make this work. Everybody have a great weekend. Thank you so much. And like I said, get at us. We want to have you on the show. I don't know when the next episode is going to be, but we have plans, and at least by the NFL draft. Have a good one, boys.